My name is Edgar, a 30-year-old software developer who once believed family meant everything. Growing up, my parents were my world-supportive, loving present. Then my brother Maxwell returned from college and slowly everything changed. When my parents died unexpectedly in that car crash last year, I was devastated. But nothing prepared me for sitting in that leather chair at the lawyer's office, hearing those crushing words that left me with nothing. Not the family business I helped build, not the home I grew up in, nothing. 1 month after I canceled those transfers, Mom's number lit up my phone. Mortgage is due. My reply was simple, not mine. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever stood up for yourself when no one else would. Growing up in a tight-knit family shaped who I am today. Some of my fondest memories revolve around our annual trips to Lake Tahoe, where Dad and I would wake up at dawn, grab our fishing gear, and head out on the misty waters. He'd tell me stories about his own childhood while teaching me to cast my line just right. "Patience, Edgar," he'd say. "The best things come to those who know how to wait." Mom would pack these incredible sandwiches, sourdough bread, with 3 kinds of cheese and her special herb spread. Those quiet mornings on the lake with my father taught me more than just how to fish. Back home, Dad took pride in teaching me practical skills. Our garage transformed into a workshop every weekend. He showed me how to change oil, replace brake pads, and eventually rebuild an entire engine. By the time I was 16, we had restored a 1976 Mustang together, turning a rusted shell into a gleaming beauty that I drove to my high school graduation. Mom would peek in occasionally, shaking her head with a smile, proud of our grease-covered bonding sessions. Mom was my academic champion. When I struggled with algebra in 8th grade, she sat with me night after night until patterns emerged from the confusion. During my science fair project on solar energy, well before it became mainstream, she helped me research and build a working model that took first place. She attended every spelling bee, debate, competition, and award ceremony, always sitting front row, her camera ready. She kept a scrapbook labeled Edgar's Journey, filled with report cards, certificates, and candid photos. Our family business, Thompson Hardware, started as a single store in our hometown of Riverside, California. What my father built with his own hands from the ground up eventually expanded to 3 locations across the county. I started working there at 15 first, just sweeping floors and stocking shelves after school. By 17, I was handling customer orders and helping with inventory on weekends. When I went to college for computer science, I didn't abandon the family business. Instead, I created their first real inventory management system during my sophomore year. Before that, Dad was still using paper ledgers and a clunky cash register system from the 90s. My program tracked stock levels, predicted ordering needs based on seasonal patterns, and streamlined the entire supply chain. When I implemented it, profits increased by nearly 20% within 6 months. After graduating while building my career as a software developer, I continued modernizing our family business. I built their e-commerce platform, allowing Thompson Hardware to compete with big-box stores by offering specialized products and local delivery. I set up automated systems for payroll, accounting, and marketing, all while taking only a modest consultant fee rather than a full salary. Dad would introduce me to suppliers and longtime customers as the brains keeping us relevant. Mom would add that I had my father's work ethic, with a 21st century toolkit. Even as I established myself professionally at a tech company in downtown Riverside, our family remained close. Sunday dinners at my parents' home were sacred. Mom would make her famous pot roast or lasagna, and we'd discuss everything from local politics to the latest Marvel movie. Dad would inevitably steer conversation toward the business, asking my opinion on expansion opportunities or new product lines. They supported my career choice, proud that I was forging my own path, while still keeping ties to the family legacy. The family home itself was a character in our story, a sprawling ranch house on 3 acres just outside the city limits. The massive oak tree in the front yard, I planted it with Dad when I was 7. He lifted me on his shoulders so I could drop the acorn into the hole we'd dug together. "This tree will grow with you," he'd told me. By the time I finished college, it was providing shade for the entire front yard. Dad's workshop behind the garage was our sanctuary. The rich scent of sawdust and motor oil permeated everything. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboards. He'd drawn outlines around each one so they always returned to their proper place. We built furniture, repaired appliances, and once constructed a treehouse in that oak tree that remained standing for 15 years. Mom's domain was the kitchen with its hand-painted tiles she'd installed herself and the herb garden visible through the bay window. She taught me to cook there, insisting that no child of mine will survive on ramen and takeout. By the time I moved into my own apartment, I could prepare a respectable coq au vin and bake bread from scratch. The kitchen table, worn smooth by decades of family meals, homework sessions, and late-night conversations, was where all important family decisions were discussed. What I'm trying to convey is that we weren't just related by blood. We were a unit, a team deeply invested in each other's lives and successes. At least that's what I believed until Maxwell returned. My brother Maxwell is 3 years older than me, and growing up we were as different as brothers could be. While I was the kid with perpetually skinned knees from building forts and fixing bikes, Maxwell was polished and calculated even as a teenager. Handsome in that conventional way that opens doors, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who expected the world to accommodate him. He played football, dated cheerleaders, and maintained just enough of a GPA to secure his spot at a prestigious business school across the country. Unlike me, Maxwell never showed interest in the family business. Summers, when I was sweating in the stockroom, he was lifeguarding at the country club pool, or interning at glamorous companies through connections made by his girlfriend's father. Dad would occasionally mention that Maxwell should learn the ropes of Thompson hardware, but these suggestions were met with vague promises of next summer that never materialized. Mom defended him, saying Maxwell has different talents. He's a people person, a future executive. After graduation, Maxwell moved to Chicago for a consulting position. His visits home became increasingly rare. Christmases, occasionally Thanksgiving, a quick stopover when he had business in Los Angeles. Phone calls were brief and infrequent. I remained in Riverside, balancing my tech career with helping at the family business, attending weekly dinners, and being present for my parents' lives. Then 6 years ago, Maxwell called with news. His firm had downsized and he'd been let go, despite what he described as stellar performance reviews. He framed it as an opportunity to reassess priorities and maybe get back to my roots for a while. Mom was ecstatic. Dad seemed cautiously optimistic, and just like that, Maxwell was moving back to Riverside. The day he returned, my parents threw a welcome home dinner that rivaled Thanksgiving. Mom prepared all his favorites: prime rib, twice-baked potatoes, chocolate mousse. Dad brought out the expensive scotch he saved for special occasions. I brought my girlfriend Allison, hoping her presence would help me maintain perspective. Maxwell arrived looking every bit the successful businessman despite his recent setback. Designer suit, expensive watch. The confident stride of someone who'd never actually failed at anything. The prodigal son returns, Dad announced, clapping him on the back. Mom couldn't stop touching his face, his shoulders, as if confirming he was really there. During dinner, Maxwell announced he'd been thinking about the family business. Thompson Hardware has untapped potential, he declared, swirling his scotch. With my business background and connections, we could really expand, maybe even franchise. I've been developing some ideas. Mom beamed. Dad leaned forward, intrigued. I sat silently, fork suspended midway to my mouth. After 6 years of absence and zero interest, suddenly Maxwell was an authority on our family business. The business where I'd invested thousands of hours while building my own career. What do you think? Edgar Allison whispered, squeezing my knee under the table. Sounds interesting, I managed, forcing a smile. I'd love to hear the details. Maxwell promised to share his comprehensive business plan in the coming days. What followed instead was a gradual infiltration. He started spending days at the main store, chatting with longtime employees, reviewing finances, and having long closed-door meetings with Dad. Mom would call me, gushing about how Maxwell was bringing fresh energy to the business. Within weeks, subtle changes appeared. Dad began consulting Maxwell first on business decisions, calling me only after they'd already reached preliminary conclusions. When I'd arrive for meetings, I'd find them already deep in discussion, papers spread across tables. Oh, Edgar's here now, Dad would say. Maxwell, catch him up on what we've decided. Decided, I'd ask. Don't you want my input on the new point-of-sale system? I'm the one who built our current infrastructure. Of course, son, Dad would reply, but his eyes would shift to Maxwell. But Maxwell has experience with these enterprise systems from his consulting days. What Maxwell had was a surface-level knowledge of buzzwords and a convincing delivery. What he lacked was any understanding of our specific business needs or technical requirements. Yet somehow his opinions now carried more weight than mine. Mom's behavior shifted too. She'd always been my cheerleader, the one who bragged about my technological contributions to the business. Now conversations centered around Maxwell's corporate experience and big-picture thinking. When I'd mention a new feature I'd added to our inventory system, she'd nod distractedly before asking if I'd heard about Maxwell's idea for expanding to neighboring counties. For months, I dismissed my growing discomfort. I told myself it was natural for parents to be excited about Maxwell's return after his long absence. I convinced myself there was room for both of us in the family dynamic, that his business perspective could complement my technical expertise. When Allison noted the changing atmosphere during Sunday dinners, I defended my parents. They're just happy to have the family complete again, I'd say. Things will balance out. But Allison, ever perceptive, wasn't convinced. I'm worried they're sidelining you, Edgar, she said one night after a particularly Maxwell-centric dinner. You've been there consistently for years while he's been gone. Now he swoops back and suddenly he's the golden child. You should say something. I brushed off her concerns, unwilling to create conflict. It'll settle down, I insisted. They're just excited he's taking an interest in the business. Then came the 20th anniversary celebration of Thompson Hardware. We rented a local event space, invited suppliers, employees, and loyal customers. I'd spent weeks preparing a presentation on the company's evolution, complete with photos spanning 2 decades and statistics showing our growth. I'd also commissioned a custom plaque, celebrating my parents' hard work and vision. But when the evening arrived, I found myself shuffled to the sidelines. Dad gave a speech introducing Maxwell as the future of Thompson Hardware and announced he would be taking on the role of Vice President of Business Development, a title created specifically for him. Mom presented him with a set of ceremonial keys to all 3 stores. My presentation was trimmed to a brief, 3-minute slot near the end of the evening when many guests had already left. The plaque I'd commissioned was displayed, but neither of my parents mentioned who had arranged it. As Maxwell worked the room shaking hands and exchanging business cards, I stood near the dessert table with Allison, a knot forming in my stomach. "This isn't right," Allison whispered. "They barely acknowledged everything you've done for the business." I watched my brother holding court, my parents beaming beside him. The message was becoming increasingly clear. Despite my years of loyalty and contribution, Maxwell had reclaimed his position as the favored son. And for the first time I couldn't ignore the painful reality of my shifting place in the family I thought I knew. The months following the anniversary celebration marked a steady erosion of my position within the family unit. Sunday dinners, once sacrosanct, became increasingly unpredictable. I'd arrive at the usual time to find the house dark, only to receive a casual text. "Dinner moved to Saturday this week. Didn't Maxwell tell you?" He hadn't, of course. Or I'd show up to discover they'd already eaten, with Mom apologetically offering to warm leftovers while explaining that Maxwell had an important call with a potential investor. Business meetings now frequently occurred without my knowledge. I'd discover major decisions had been made when implementing system updates or processing payroll. New supplier relationships, staffing changes, even modifications to the store layouts, all happened without my input. When I'd question these changes, Dad would look surprised. "We discussed this last week," he'd say. "Oh, that's right, you weren't there. Maxwell handled it." Perhaps the most telling change was when my parents invited Maxwell to move back into the family home temporarily while he established himself. His temporary stay extended indefinitely as he converted the guest room into an office and settled into a routine that placed him at the center of daily family life. Meanwhile, when I'd stop by, unannounced conversations would halt abruptly, papers would be shuffled away, and I'd be greeted with the distinct feeling of having interrupted something I wasn't meant to see. After weeks of this treatment, I finally attempted to address my concerns directly with Mom. I caught her alone one morning helping in the herb garden she loved so much. "Mom, I feel like I'm being pushed out of family decisions. I said, carefully transplanting seedlings as she'd taught me, especially with the business. Has something changed? She paused, hands deep in soil. Don't be silly, Edgar. We value your input. It's just that Maxwell brings fresh perspectives we need right now. Fresh perspectives are great, I countered, but I've been consistently involved for years. Now I'm finding out about major decisions after they're made. She patted my hand, leaving a smudge of dirt. You're being too sensitive, honey. Maxwell is just eager to contribute after being away so long. Your father and I are getting older. We need to think about succession planning. The implication hung in the air between us. Maxwell was being groomed for succession despite my years of dedication. My conversation with Dad went no better. I cornered him in his workshop, the space where we'd always communicated most honestly. Dad, what's going on with the business? I feel completely sidelined lately. He barely looked up from the cabinet he was sanding. Business is evolving, son. Maxwell's connections are opening doors. His Harvard MBA gives him insights into scaling operations. And my contributions. The systems I built. The customers I've relationships with. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. Nobody's discounting what you've done, Edgar. But you've got your own career. Maxwell is committing to Thompson Hardware full-time. We need that level of dedication at this stage. The irony was staggering. My own career had never prevented me from investing countless hours in the family business hours Maxwell had spent building his resume elsewhere, until opportunity dried up and he returned home. When I tried to discuss these concerns with Maxwell directly, his response was textbook gaslighting. You're imagining things, little brother, he said with a condescending smile. Mom and Dad appreciate everything you've done, but you've got your tech job, your girlfriend. I'm fully committed to growing the family legacy. There's no competition here unless you're creating one in your head. The final confirmation that something fundamental had shifted came 6 months after Maxwell's return, when I discovered through a casual comment from our accountant that the company was being restructured. Shares were being redistributed, with Maxwell receiving a significant ownership stake, while my minor equity position remained unchanged. Furthermore, his new VP title came with authority to make unilateral decisions, authority that frequently overrode my carefully implemented systems and processes. These developments took a personal toll. I began experiencing anxiety, waking at 3 a.m., with a racing heart, replaying conversations and looking for what I might have done to deserve this treatment. My work performance suffered as I struggled to concentrate. Allison noticed my deteriorating mental state and urged me to create boundaries. You need to protect yourself, she insisted. Your parents are making choices that hurt you. That doesn't mean you have to keep showing up for more pain. My friend Jared was blunter during our weekly basketball game. They're taking advantage of you, he said, blocking my shot. You built systems that keep their business running, and now they're pushing you aside for Golden Boy who couldn't be bothered for years. That's some bullshit, man. With their encouragement, I began creating distance. I reduced my involvement in the business to essential system maintenance. I started declining some Sunday dinners, focusing instead on building my life with Allison. I remained civil but protected my heart from further dismissal. It was during this period that my father's brother, Uncle Robert, reached out. We met for lunch at a diner far from any family businesses. Uncle Robert had always been the black sheep, the artist, to my father's businessman. They maintained a cordial relationship, but I hadn't seen him in over a year. I've been watching what's happening, he said without preamble. Your brother is manipulating your parents. I nearly choked on my coffee. That's a serious accusation. I know manipulation when I see it. It was your mother's specialty when we were kids. He leaned forward. Maxwell is in financial trouble. His downsizing story. He was fired for ethical violations involving client funds. How do you know this? I have friends in Chicago. Made some calls when he suddenly returned with grand plans for the family business. Uncle Robert's eyes narrowed. He's burning through money, gambling debts, bad investments. He needs access to assets, and your parents' business is his target. It seemed far-fetched, yet it explained Maxwell's sudden interest in a business he'd ignored for years. Uncle Robert urged me to protect myself legally, suggesting I document my contributions to the business and secure copies of original agreements regarding my equity stake. "Your parents are being charmed," he warned. Richard always had a blind spot where Maxwell was concerned. "Just be careful and make sure you're legally protected." I didn't want to believe Maxwell's intentions were so calculated, but I began paying closer attention to financial reports, noticing discrepancies in expense accounts and unusual transfers that coincided with Maxwell's business development trips. Still without concrete evidence, I hesitated to confront my family with accusations that would only further damage our strained relationship. Instead, I followed Uncle Robert's advice, documenting my work and securing my legal position as best I could, while watching from an increasingly painful distance as Maxwell solidified his place at the center of the family business and the family itself. The call came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was working late finalizing code for a client project when my phone lit up with Mom's number. Expecting another canceled dinner notification, I almost didn't answer. When I did, it wasn't her voice, but a stranger's, a paramedic, explaining there had been an accident on Highway 15, black ice, a tractor trailer. My parents' car had been crushed between the truck and the concrete barrier. The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency room fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. When I arrived, Maxwell was already there, deep in conversation with a doctor in the hallway. He looked up as I approached, his face uncharacteristically pale. "They're gone, Edgar," he said, voice hollow. "Dad died on impact. Mom made it to the hospital, but—" He trailed off, gesturing helplessly toward the room where a nurse was disconnecting monitoring equipment. Despite our recent tensions in that moment, we were just two brothers facing an unimaginable loss. I fell into a chair, my legs unable to support me. Maxwell sat beside me, and for several minutes we existed in shared silence, the weight of orphanhood settling over us. The following days brought a temporary truce. We worked together, arranging the funeral, selecting caskets, choosing photographs for the memorial boards. Maxwell handled the obituary and coordinated with the funeral home, while I notified family, friends, and organized the reception. We moved through these tasks mechanically, grief temporarily superseding our differences. The funeral itself was a testament to my parents' standing in the community. The chapel overflowed with people, employees, past and present business associates, neighbors, friends from church and civic organizations. I delivered a eulogy focused on Dad's work ethic and Mom's boundless generosity. Maxwell spoke about their legacy and commitment to family. We stood side by side, accepting condolences, presenting a united front in our grief. Local businesses sent food for weeks. The hardware stores closed for 3 days in tribute. Sympathy cards arrived by the dozens. In this outpouring of community support, our fractured relationship seemed insignificant. We were bound by shared loss, and for a brief period, I believed this tragedy might heal our rift. That illusion shattered exactly 1 week after the funeral. I drove to the family home, intending to help sort through Mom's personal items as we'd agreed. When I inserted my key into the front door, it didn't turn. Thinking it might be jammed, I tried again with more force. Nothing. As I stood there confused, Maxwell's car pulled into the driveway. He approached with an apologetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry about that," he said, producing his own key. "I had the locks changed yesterday. Security concerns, you know. People know the house is empty now." "Empty? I thought you were staying here." "I am. I meant empty of Mom and Dad." He opened the door, gesturing me inside. "I should have given you the new key. It slipped my mind with everything happening." The explanation seemed reasonable, yet something in his tone suggested otherwise. Inside, I noticed subtle changes. Dad's recliner replaced by a sleek leather armchair. Mom's knickknacks removed from shelves, spaces being systematically erased and reimagined. Maxwell had wasted no time making the house his own. "I've boxed up some of Mom's clothes for donation," he mentioned casually. "Her jewelry and personal items are set aside for us to go through together." "What about Dad's study?" I asked, heading toward the room that had been off-limits to us as children. "I've been sorting through his papers," Maxwell replied, stepping quickly to block my path. "Lots of business documents that need proper filing. I'll let you know when it's organized." Over the following days, more concerning patterns emerged. I discovered the study door now had a deadbolt. Requests to review business documents or family papers were deflected with vague promises of later or when things settle down. When I arrived one afternoon to find workers removing the oak tree I'd planted with Dad, the one he said would grow with me, something snapped inside. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded as Maxwell supervised the arborists. "It's diseased," he replied smoothly. "Could fall on the house during the next storm. The insurance adjuster recommended removal. That tree is perfectly healthy. I would know, I've been taking care of it for 23 years. My voice cracked with emotion. Dad and I planted it together. Maxwell's expression softened into practiced sympathy. "I know it has sentimental value, but we have to be practical. I'm responsible for this property now." The casual "I'm responsible" sent a chill through me. There had been no discussion about the house or property since the funeral. I assumed we would eventually share decisions about our childhood home, yet Maxwell was acting as though his authority was already established. That evening I called the family lawyer, Harrison Thompson, no relation to our surname, requesting information about my parents' will and when we might review it. His response was oddly evasive. "There have been some changes in recent months," he said carefully. "Maxwell has requested we schedule the formal reading next week. You'll receive the official notification tomorrow." "Changes? What kind of changes?" A heavy pause. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that until the formal reading." "I'm sorry, Edgar." Increasingly unsettled, I returned to the house the following day, determined to access Dad's study and find answers. I arrived to discover my personal belongings, items I'd kept in my old bedroom memorabilia, stored in the attic. Even the tools Dad and I had shared in the workshop packed in cardboard boxes in the garage. "I needed to clear some space," Maxwell explained when confronted. "The estate appraiser is coming next week. Thought it would be easier if personal items were already separated." "Estate appraiser? Are you selling the house? My childhood home, the only constant through years of change." "Just exploring options," he replied vaguely. "We need to liquidate assets to cover estate taxes." Without discussing it with me, "This is our parents' home, Maxwell. Our home." He sighed, checking his watch impatiently. "Look, all of this will be clearer after the will reading. For now, I'm making preliminary arrangements based on my understanding of the situation. Take your boxes if you want, they're just collecting dust here." I loaded what I could into my car that day, feeling like an intruder in the place I'd called home for most of my life. The family photos had been removed from walls. Mom's garden was already showing signs of neglect. Dad's workshop tools were arranged differently, some missing altogether. With each box I carried out, the reality became clearer. I was being systematically erased from the family narrative, my history packed away to make room for whatever future Maxwell was constructing. As the day of the will reading approached, a gnawing anxiety grew in my stomach. Uncle Robert's warnings echoed in my mind. Maxwell's confident handling of funeral arrangements, his immediate changes to the house, his cryptic comments about liquidating assets, all suggested he knew something I didn't about our parents' final wishes. I tried to prepare myself for disappointment, but nothing could have readied me for what awaited in the lawyer's wood-paneled office. Harrison Thompson's law office occupied the third floor of a red brick building in downtown Riverside. I'd been there before with my father to discuss business matters, but never for something as momentous as this. The reception area featured leather chairs, framed diplomas, and a hushed atmosphere of significance. The receptionist, a woman who'd worked for Thompson for at least 15 years, gave me a sympathetic smile as I signed in. "Mr. Thompson will be with you shortly," she said. "Your brother arrived a few minutes ago." I nodded, taking a seat as far from the door as possible, needing these final moments to compose myself. My palms were sweating. Despite my attempts to prepare for the worst, hope, stubbornly persisted hope that my parents had been fair, that my years of loyalty would be acknowledged, that Maxwell's recent behavior was just overzealous grief, rather than foreknowledge. Maxwell emerged from the inner office, spotted me, and approached with an outstretched hand. "Edgar, good to see you." His tone was formal, as though we were business associates, rather than brothers who'd grown up sharing bunk beds. I shook his hand, briefly. "Maxwell." "Harrison is ready for us," he said, gesturing toward the door. "Shall we?" The lawyer's office was exactly as I remembered: dark wood shelving green banker's lamp, the smell of leather-bound books and furniture polish. Harrison Thompson stood as we entered, his face grave. At 67, he'd been my father's lawyer and friend for decades. I'd always liked him, appreciated his direct manner and integrity. "Edgar Maxwell," he nodded to each of us. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you anything? Water, coffee?" We both declined. Maxwell took the chair directly in front of the desk, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped loosely on his knee, the picture of relaxed confidence. I sat straighter, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. Thompson opened a leather portfolio, removing several documents. He adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the last will and testament of Richard and Catherine Thompson. Before I begin the formal reading, I want to express my personal condolences. Your parents were fine people, clients I deeply respected." He shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. Something about his demeanor, a slight tension around his mouth, an uncharacteristic hesitation, increased my unease. "I'll summarize the key points before reviewing specific bequests," Thompson continued. "This will was executed 4 months ago, replacing previous versions. Both Richard and Catherine were of sound mind when they signed, with 2 witnesses present as required by California law. 4 months ago, right around the time Maxwell had been having those private meetings with our parents, a cold feeling spread through my chest." Thompson began reading, his voice taking on a formal cadence. "I, Richard Thompson, together with my wife, Catherine Thompson, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be our last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." Standard legal preamble gave way to the heart of the document, and with each sentence the room seemed to grow colder. "Regarding Thompson Hardware Incorporated, including all 3 store locations, inventory, equipment accounts, and associated intellectual property, we bequeath 100% ownership to our son, Maxwell Richard Thompson. 100%. Not split between brothers, not even a token share for me. The business I'd helped modernize, whose systems I'd built and maintained for years, whose growth I'd facilitated, all to Maxwell. The family residence at 428 Oakwood Lane, including all furnishings, vehicles, and personal property contained therein, we bequeath to our son, Maxwell Richard Thompson. The home I grew up in, the workshop where Dad and I had spent countless hours, Mom's kitchen where she taught me to cook, all mine by memory only now. Our vacation property at Lake Tahoe, including the boat and all equipment stored therein, we bequeath to our son, Maxwell Richard Thompson. The lake house where I'd learned to fish, where I'd spent every summer growing up, where I'd planned to someday teach my own children to swim, also gone. Our investment accounts, retirement funds, life insurance proceeds, and all remaining financial assets we bequeath to our son, Maxwell Richard Thompson. By now, each word landed like a physical blow. I sat rigidly, face expressionless, through tremendous effort, as my entire inheritance, my entire history, was systematically awarded to my brother. Finally, after what seemed an eternity of "to Maxwell, to Maxwell, to Maxwell," Thompson paused, turning a page. "To our son, Edgar James Thompson, we bequeath the sum of $10,000. $10,000. After a lifetime of loyalty, contribution, and love, $10,000 and nothing else. Not even a personal item, a watch, a book. Nothing but a token payment that felt more like severance than inheritance." Thompson continued with minor bequests to distant relatives and charities, but I barely heard him. Blood pounded in my ears. My vision narrowed to the document in his hands, the physical manifestation of my parents' final betrayal. When Thompson finally finished reading, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Are there any questions?" Maxwell shifted in his chair. "I believe everything is quite clear, Harrison. Thank you for your thoroughness." His lack of surprise confirmed what I'd suspected: he'd known the contents all along, had probably helped orchestrate them. Edgar Thompson looked at me with something like regret in his eyes. 1,000 questions crowded my mind. Why? How could they? What had I done to deserve this complete dismissal? but I wouldn't give Maxwell the satisfaction of seeing me beg for explanations. When was this will created exactly? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Thompson consulted the document. It was signed on February 12th of this year. And the previous will, what did it specify? A flicker of discomfort crossed the lawyer's face. I'm not at liberty to discuss previous versions in detail. I can confirm that earlier arrangements included more equitable distributions. Maxwell cleared his throat. The changes reflect our parents' final wishes, Edgar. They obviously felt the business and properties would be best managed under unified control rather than divided. I turned to face him directly. Convenient that they reached this conclusion shortly after your return despite decades of my involvement and your complete absence. His expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into practiced concern. I understand you're disappointed. This must be difficult to process. Standing abruptly, Maxwell buttoned his suit jacket, a dismissive gesture, signaling the conclusion of business. Harrison, thank you again. Please transfer the relevant documentation to my office when ready. He turned to me with the air of someone granting a favor. Edgar, I know this is a shock. Once everything's transferred, we should discuss your future role. There's always a position for you at Thompson Hardware, of course. You'll need to earn your place moving forward, but I'm willing to acknowledge your technical contributions. The condescension in his offer to earn a place in the business I'd helped build while he was pursuing his career elsewhere was the final insult. I remained seated, unwilling to rise and pretend this was a normal business conclusion. I'll let you two brothers discuss matters, Thompson said, clearly uncomfortable. Edgar, if you have any further questions about the legal aspects, my door is always open to you. Maxwell nodded and departed, leaving me alone with the lawyer. As the door closed, Thompson's professional veneer cracked slightly. This wasn't my recommendation, he said quietly. I want you to know that. But you executed it anyway. He sighed heavily. I'm bound by professional obligations. Your parents were adamant about the changes despite my suggestions to reconsider certain aspects. They cut me out completely. After everything, my voice finally broke. Why? Thompson removed his glasses again, suddenly looking every day of his 67 years. The timing of these changes was unusual. Coming so soon after Maxwell's return, coinciding with your reduced involvement in family matters. My reduced involvement happened because they started excluding me. I can't speak to family dynamics, Edgar. I can only tell you that when they signed this document, they believed they were doing what was best. He hesitated, then added, though between us, I'm not convinced they had all the relevant information when making that determination. He didn't elaborate further, but his meaning was clear enough. Maxwell had influenced their decision, perhaps with selective or manipulated information. It provided cold comfort. Regardless of how it happened, my parents had signed a document explicitly disinheriting me. Whatever manipulations Maxwell might have employed, they had chosen to believe him over their decades of experience with me. As I left the office, the bright California sunshine seemed a mockery of the darkness that had descended on my life. Everything I had believed about my family, my place in it, my parents' love, all called into question by a few sheets of paper and a fountain pen signature. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, unable to drive, unable even to cry, suspended in a state of shock that felt like floating outside my own body. When I finally started the engine, I had no destination in mind. I couldn't face returning to my apartment where Allison would be waiting with hopeful eyes. I couldn't bear calling Uncle Robert to confirm his warnings had been justified. So I drove aimlessly, eventually finding myself at the beach 20 miles away watching waves crash against rocks with indifferent persistence. Nature continuing its cycles unconcerned with human betrayal. That evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, I finally allowed myself to fully feel the magnitude of what had happened. Not just the material loss, substantial though it was, but the deeper wound of knowing my parents had deemed me unworthy of their legacy. With that recognition came the first glimmer of something beyond grief and shock, a slow-burning anger that would eventually fuel what came next. I spent that night on Jared's couch, unable to face Allison and her inevitable sympathy. By morning, the initial shock had hardened into something more focused. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, and began methodically evaluating my options. My first call was to Eleanor Reeves, a lawyer specializing in estate litigation. We met that afternoon in her downtown office where I laid out the entire situation, my years of contribution to the family business, the sudden changes after Maxwell's return, and the suspicious timing of the new will. "Can I contest this?" I asked, after explaining everything. They cut me out completely just months before their death after decades of having me involved in the business. Eleanor reviewed the documents I'd brought her, expression grave. Contesting a will in California requires proving either undue influence, fraud, duress, or lack of capacity. It's not enough to show the distribution is unfair. You need evidence your brother manipulated your parents, or that they weren't mentally competent. What about the timing, 4 months before their death, after my brother had been back for less than 2 years? Suspicious timing helps but isn't conclusive, she explained. Do you have any direct evidence Maxwell coerced them or provided false information? I thought of Uncle Robert's warnings, but they were second-hand allegations without documentation. Nothing concrete, just patterns of behavior and my uncle's suspicions. Eleanor was honest about the challenges. Will contests are expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. Without strong evidence, your chances of success are limited. Courts generally defer to the written document, unless there's compelling reason not to. She suggested investigating whether Maxwell had isolated my parents from other influences, if there were witnesses to inappropriate pressure, or if any documentary evidence existed showing my parents' true intentions differed from the final will. I left her office with a clearer understanding of the legal landscape, but no immediate path forward. Without smoking gun evidence, a court battle would be prolonged and uncertain. More importantly, it would drain the emotional energy I needed to rebuild my life. Allison met me that evening at a neutral location, the park where we'd had our first date. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Jared had filled her in on the basics. "I'm so sorry, Edgar," she said, taking my hands. "This is beyond cruel after everything you've done for your family." I summarized my meeting with the lawyer, the slim chances of successful litigation. "I'm not sure fighting this in court is the answer." "What are you thinking then?" Allison asked. "Just let Maxwell take everything." "I'm not sure yet, but I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I decide." That night after Allison went to bed, I opened my laptop and logged into Thomson Hardware's systems remotely. Despite recent changes in the business, I was still the architect of their digital infrastructure. Every password, access point, and security protocol had been designed and implemented by me. Maxwell might control the company on paper, but I still had the keys to its digital kingdom. I wasn't looking to sabotage, merely to understand the current state of affairs. What I discovered was disturbing. Multiple large cash withdrawals had been processed in recent months, categorized vaguely as business development expenses with minimal documentation. Several new vendor relationships had been established with companies I'd never heard of, commanding premium prices for standard products. Most concerning, Maxwell had already taken substantial advances against future profits, effectively paying himself large bonuses from the business before he'd contributed anything meaningful to its operation. The pattern suggested not just opportunism, but desperation. Maxwell wasn't simply taking advantage of an unexpected windfall. He was actively draining cash from the business at an unsustainable rate. Uncle Robert's warnings about gambling debts and financial troubles suddenly seemed much more credible. Digging deeper into the automated systems I'd built over years, I made a critical discovery. All the essential operational processes of both the business and my parents' personal accounts still ran through my infrastructure. Utility payments for all 3 stores, and the family home mortgage payments, insurance premiums, payroll, supplier payments, all flowed through automated systems I had meticulously created and maintained. Maxwell might legally own everything now, but he remained dependent on the invisible architecture I'd built. Like many technically illiterate executives, he understood the outcomes but not the mechanisms that produced them. He'd been happy to let me maintain these systems even while pushing me out of decision-making. Now that very oversight offered an unexpected leverage point. I sat back in my chair contemplating the implications. With a few keystrokes, I could halt the entire automated payment infrastructure. Bills would go unpaid. Services would be interrupted. The smooth operation Maxwell had inherited would grind to a jarring halt. The question was whether I should, and what it would accomplish beyond petty revenge. The following morning, I met with Jared at our regular basketball court. Between jump shots, I outlined what I'd discovered and the power I still wielded over the business operations. "So you could basically shut everything down?" he asked, dribbling slowly. "Make his life hell?" "Technically, yes. But that affects employees too, people who depend on those paychecks." Jared passed me the ball. "Those same employees who watched Maxwell take over while you got pushed aside, the ones who'll be out of jobs anyway if he keeps bleeding the business dry." "That's not their fault," I countered, missing the shot. "Look," Jared said, retrieving the ball. "I'm not saying crash the whole business, but making him feel some consequences, that's just standing up for yourself. Your parents made their choice a shitty one, and now Maxwell has to deal with the realities of running what he inherited." I thought about Maxwell's smug offer to let me earn a place in the business my systems kept functioning, about the oak tree being cut down, about boxes of my history relegated to the garage. That evening I made my decision. I would not sabotage the business or harm innocent employees, but I would systematically cancel all automatic payments related to Maxwell's personal benefits, mortgage payments on the family home utility bills, insurance premiums, credit card payments, and the generous management stipend he arranged for himself. The payroll for actual employees would continue uninterrupted. Before implementing any changes, I carefully documented the current state of all systems, taking screenshots and saving confirmation numbers. I created a secure backup of all transaction histories, ensuring I could prove exactly what I'd done and hadn't done if legal questions arose. This wasn't about destruction, but about forcing accountability. Over the next 3 days, I methodically revoked automatic payment authorizations for non-essential services. For each cancellation, I included detailed notes explaining that the account holder needed to establish new payment methods. I set up forwarding of all notification emails to Maxwell's personal account, ensuring he'd receive every alert about failed payments or service interruptions. I was careful to maintain essential business functions. This wasn't about punishing employees or customers, only about removing the invisible support system Maxwell had taken for granted. As a final precaution, I implemented secondary security protocols that would prevent easy reinstatement of these automated services. Maxwell would need more than basic passwords to undo what I'd done. He would need the specialized knowledge I'd accumulated over years of building these systems, knowledge he had never bothered to acquire or appreciate. When I finally closed my laptop after the last cancellation, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, only a quiet certainty that I had taken back a small measure of control in a situation where I'd been rendered powerless. Maxwell had inherited everything on paper, but papers wouldn't keep the lights on or the mortgage paid. For that, he would need to confront the consequences of pushing aside the person who had quietly maintained the infrastructure of his inherited empire. Allison found me on the balcony that night, staring at the city lights. "You did it," she asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "It's done," I confirmed. "Nothing illegal, nothing destructive, just removing my unpaid labor from the equation." She rested her head against my shoulder. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," I said. "And I start building something new, something that's truly mine." In the days that followed, I threw myself into planning my future, updating my resume, reaching out to industry contacts, researching potential opportunities that would leverage my skills while keeping me far from Thompson Hardware and its new owner. I declined to respond to increasingly frequent technical questions from the business's managers, referring them instead to Maxwell with a polite reminder that he now owned all aspects of the operation. Allison supported me through alternating waves of grief, anger, and determination. "Your parents made a terrible mistake," she said one night as we shared takeout on our tiny balcony. "But their mistake doesn't define your worth. What you build next will." As the cascade of cancellations began taking effect, my phone remained conspicuously silent. No calls from Maxwell. No desperate pleas for technical assistance. Only the quiet satisfaction of knowing notifications were flooding his inbox, each one a small reminder of the infrastructure he'd inherited, but never understood. Then, exactly 28 days after I'd implemented the final cancellation, a text message appeared on my phone from my mother's number. A number, Maxwell, had apparently taken over. The message was brief. Mortgage is due. No, please. No acknowledgement of what had transpired between us. Just an entitled expectation that I would resume my supporting role in his narrative. My reply was equally brief. Not mine. With those 2 words, I closed the door on years of unreciprocated loyalty and unacknowledged contribution. Whatever happened next would be Maxwell's problem, not mine. I had begun writing a new story, one where I determined my own value instead of waiting for others to recognize it. The aftermath of my not mine text was exactly what you might expect, an explosion of angry calls and messages from Maxwell. I blocked his number after the 3rd voicemail, which devolved into threats and obscenities. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned the family home had received shut-off notices for utilities. The mortgage payment was indeed overdue, triggering late fees and threatening the impeccable payment history my parents had maintained for decades. At Thompson Hardware, the situation wasn't much better. While I'd maintained essential business functions like employee payroll, Maxwell's personal draws from company accounts had been terminated. Without my systems automatically balancing accounts and ensuring adequate cash flow, the business operations became increasingly chaotic. Vendors who weren't paid on time began demanding payments before delivering stock. The custom-built inventory management system that had optimized ordering for years began showing errors because no one was maintaining it properly. 2 weeks after my text message, Maxwell's lawyer, not Harrison Thompson but a more aggressive litigator from Los Angeles, sent a formal letter accusing me of sabotage and unauthorized access to company systems. The letter demanded I restore all automated functions immediately or face legal consequences. My new lawyer, Eleanor Reeves, responded with a masterfully crafted letter of her own. It detailed every system I had personally created, the hours of unpaid maintenance I'd provided over years, and the careful documentation of each canceled automation. She emphasized that I had not destroyed data-corrupted systems or hindered essential business operations. I had simply discontinued providing free technical support to a company that had explicitly excluded me from ownership. My client has no legal obligation to provide unpaid services to Thompson Hardware or its owner, her letter concluded. Mr. Maxwell Thompson now owns these systems and bears full responsibility for their operation. Should he require technical assistance, Mr. Edgar Thompson would consider providing consultation services at his standard industry rate of $200 per hour with payment required in advance. The letter effectively stalled any legal action. Maxwell couldn't claim I'd damaged company property when I'd simply stopped maintaining it for free. His lawyer would have advised him that pursuing the matter would likely expose his own financial mismanagement to court scrutiny, something he clearly wanted to avoid. 3 days after this legal exchange, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment, Harrison Thompson himself. The family lawyer looked uncomfortable standing in my modest living room, declining my offer of coffee. "I'm here, unofficially," he began. "Maxwell doesn't know I'm speaking with you. What can I do for you, Harrison?" He sighed heavily. "Things are deteriorating rapidly at the business. Maxwell is struggling with the realities of management. Several key employees have resigned. Vendors are demanding payment terms be revised. The bank is asking questions about cash flow projections. Sounds like standard business challenges the owner should address," I replied neutrally. Edgar Harrison said, his professional facade cracking slightly. "Your father built that business from nothing. Whatever happened with the will, I know, he wouldn't want to see it collapse like this. Is there no middle ground here? No way to preserve his legacy?" I studied the older man thoughtfully. "Are you asking me to rescue the business for Maxwell's benefit? I'm asking you to consider what your parents would have wanted for the business, for the employees who depend on it, for the community it serves." It was a shrewd appeal to my better nature, one that might have worked weeks earlier. But I'd had time to process my grief, my anger, and ultimately to reach clarity. What my parents wanted was made explicitly clear in their will, Harrison. They wanted Maxwell to have everything. They wanted me to have nothing. I'm simply respecting their wishes by removing myself completely from the equation. I paused, letting the words settle. Maxwell owns a business he knows nothing about running. That was their choice, not mine. Harrison looked pained but nodded slowly. I understand your position, but if you change your mind— I won't, I said with finality. But I appreciate your concern for my father's legacy. It's more than my parents showed for my contributions to building it. After Harrison left, I felt a strange lightness. For the first time since the will reading, I had articulated my position without anger or bitterness, just a clear-eyed acceptance of reality. My parents had made their choice. Maxwell was living with the consequences, and I was finally free to build something new. That freedom was tested a week later when Maxwell himself appeared at my workplace. I was leaving for lunch when I spotted him waiting beside my car in the parking lot, looking considerably less polished than during our last encounter. His designer suit had been replaced by rumpled khakis and an untucked button-down. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. 5 minutes, he said as I approached. Just give me 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat in a nearby park, the late autumn sun casting long shadows across the grass. The business is in trouble, he began without preamble. The systems you built, no one understands how they work. The documentation is incomplete. The documentation is comprehensive, I corrected. It just requires technical knowledge to interpret knowledge you never bothered to acquire while pushing me out. He winced, but continued. Look, I know things got complicated, but this is our parents' legacy. You worked hard to help build it. Do you really want to see it fail? What exactly are you asking for, Maxwell? Help me stabilize things. Restore the automated systems. Train someone if you won't do it yourself. He hesitated clearly, struggling with the words, I'll compensate you fairly. Compensate me, I repeated flatly. You inherit everything our parents built, everything I helped build, and now you offer to compensate me for saving what you're running into the ground. What do you want then? Frustration edged his voice. A public apology. Fine. A position in the company. It's yours. Name your price. I studied my brother, really looked at him perhaps for the first time in years. Behind the entitlement and manipulation was something I hadn't expected to see: fear. Maxwell wasn't just worried about losing his inheritance. He was terrified of failing, of being exposed as incapable of managing what had been handed to him. I don't want anything from you, I said finally. Not money, not a position, not an apology. The business, the house, they're yours exactly as our parents intended. So are the responsibilities that come with them. So you'll do nothing, just let it all collapse. Desperation crept into his voice. That's entirely up to you. You're the owner now. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. Not mine, remember? As I walked away, Maxwell called after me. Is this what it's all about? Punishing me. Punishing them through their precious business. I turned back briefly. No, Maxwell. It's about finally recognizing the truth of what they decided. They chose you. They decided you should have everything, and I should have nothing. I'm simply honoring their wishes by removing myself completely from the equation. You wanted it all. Congratulations. It's all yours, including the consequences. That confrontation proved to be the turning point in my healing journey. Something shifted within me, a release of the last lingering hope that my family might somehow recognize my worth, acknowledge the injustice. In letting go of that hope, I found unexpected freedom. 2 days later, Uncle Robert called with news. Your brother is trying to sell the business, he reported. He's approached several potential buyers, including Thompson Hardware's main competitor. That's his prerogative as the owner, I replied, surprising myself with my genuine lack of emotional response. There's something else, Uncle Robert continued. When I was helping clear some things from my storage unit, I found a box your mother asked me to hold last Christmas. It has your name on it. The box contained letters, dozens of them written by my parents over the years but never sent. Birthday reflections, Christmas thoughts, notes about proud moments. The most recent was dated just 3 weeks before their accident, expressing concern about my increasing distance and confusion about why I'd been missing family dinners. We miss your presence, my mother had written. Maxwell says you're busy with your own life now, focusing on your career, but it doesn't feel right. We keep trying to reach you. The realization was like ice water. Maxwell had been intercepting communications, isolating my parents, while feeding them a narrative of my voluntary withdrawal. The manipulation was even more calculated than I'd imagined. I shared the letters with Allison, who had stood by me through every phase of this difficult journey. "Does this change anything?" she asked gently, knowing they still cared. I considered carefully before answering. "It explains some things, but it doesn't change the outcome. They still signed that will. They still chose to believe Maxwell over decades of evidence about who I was, who he was. They were victims of manipulation, yes, but they were also adults who made choices. And now I focus on building something new, something that's truly mine." In the months that followed, I channeled my energy into creating my own software consulting business, specializing in the same inventory and payment systems I'd perfected at Thompson Hardware. Jared joined me as a partner, bringing his sales expertise to complement my technical skills. Allison supported the venture with her marketing background, helping us establish a distinctive brand. Meanwhile, Maxwell sold Thompson Hardware to a regional chain for far less than its true value. The family home went on the market shortly afterward. I drove past once, seeing the stump where our oak tree had stood, feeling a momentary pang that faded quicker than expected. The physical landmarks of my childhood were disappearing, but the memories and lessons remained. Through a confidential settlement negotiated by our respective lawyers, I received some family mementos I'd valued. Dad's collection of vintage fishing lures, Mom's handwritten recipe book photographs I'd feared lost. Maxwell kept the bulk of the inheritance, but addressing his financial mismanagement had significantly diminished its value. He eventually moved to Arizona to work for a former business school classmate, our paths unlikely to cross again. Forgiveness didn't come easily or completely. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but I gradually reached a place of acceptance, not for my parents' or brother's sake, but for my own peace. Their choices reflected their limitations, not my worth. In walking away from the family business, I discovered my own capacity for resilience, creativity, and ultimately success on my own terms. 2 years after that devastating day in the lawyer's office, my consulting business was thriving, serving clients across 3 states. Allison and I were engaged planning a small ceremony focused on quality time with friends who'd become our chosen family. We'd purchased a modest home with a yard where I'd planted an oak sapling of my own, a symbol not of what was lost, but of what could still grow from difficult beginnings. The inheritance I ultimately received wasn't measured in dollars or property. It was the hard-won knowledge that my value wasn't determined by others' recognition. That loyalty should be reciprocal, not exploitative. That sometimes walking away is more powerful than fighting for scraps of acknowledgement from those unwilling or unable to provide it. The true legacy isn't money or buildings or businesses. It's the values we live by and the relationships we nurture. My parents failed that lesson in the end, but their failure became my education. Now I build each day on a foundation of mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the freedom that comes from defining success on my own terms. Have you ever had to walk away from something you helped build to preserve your self-respect? Or struggled with family members who couldn't see your true value? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life journeys of overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in starting over. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, "Not mine."